The following edition of Connecticut Valley Views is made possible by Windsor Federal Savings, with offices in Windsor, Bloomfield, Granby, and East Windsor. Neighbors helping neighbors since 1936. Join me, Susan Regan, host of Connecticut Valley Views, the most widely watched interview program on Connecticut Public Access TV. Proof to the people is the byline, insight without bias, generating a 360 perspective. Our mission is to focus on topical subjects with thought-provoking interviews regarding municipal leadership, current affairs, educational and political topics, as well as key destination points in New England.
And here is your host for Connecticut Valley Views, Susan Regan.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Our subject is urban outreach, and I'm very pleased to have two guests with me. Regina Roundtree, she's the CEO of Cogent Consulting, specializing in community organizing, and most recently and most importantly, founder of Connecticut Black Republicans and Conservatives. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And Gil Martinez, he is the executive director of Hartford Public Access TV. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
I think that both of you are representing two areas from which we need to have a little more knowledge about urban outreach. And I think you represent groups, respectively, that are going to be very knowledgeable and hopefully bringing us to a little bit more information and education in that area. I would also like to extend Connecticut Valley Views thanks to the Connecticut Historical Society. They've been very supportive to us with providing our venue today and in previous programs. And for our other show segments, always very generous with their time and their venue. I'd like you to check out their website. It is www.chs.org, and for their exhibit schedule and for member information. All right, we're going to start with the first question, discussion topic, overview of your current position relative to involvement with interfacing and how it impacts the status of urban community. Regina, your thoughts on that?
Sure. So Connecticut Black Republicans and Conservatives is just over a year old, although I've been a Republican ever since I first registered to vote. And I think part of the reason that I decided to form an organization here in Connecticut was simply that it seemed like it was time for there to be more presence in the urban communities around the values and platforms that support the Republican Party. I felt like we could be helpful, useful, and I felt like there was kind of this disconnect, at least in Connecticut. You could kind of see connections that were happening nationally, but not locally. And so I formed the organization, started reaching out and finding other conservatives of color, and brought them together in a group. And so
was it surprising, the numbers you were able to reach, or was it what you expected?
I give the joke, which I give all the time, is that I felt like it was an underground railroad. I would go to one person and they'd be like, oh, I think there's a Black Republican over in that city.
Oh, okay.
You know, and they would send me over there, you know, to basically, I would be going to white organizations and white groups just saying, do you know any Black Republicans?
Right.
And
is there a fear, let me ask you that question, is there a fear to come out in the Black community to say, yes, I believe in the Conservatives and Republicans?
Yes, there's a big stigma. I think that just historically, sometimes history has gotten switched around. Mm-hmm. So the KKK party came from the Democratic Party.
Right.
And then as you kind of move up through history and you look at, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and when you kind of look at the Voting Rights Act, when you look at the Civil Rights Act, that was passed majority by Republicans, mm-hmm. even though they were smaller in number, and history will show you that. However, you know, there's kind of this debate on, well, the Southern strategy and who had that and what happened to white flight. And so there's been this kind of mix-up of history and facts, and then there just comes to this sense, when it really came down to states' rights and less federal government, which Republicans were for, but as people of color, we knew we needed the federal government because they're the ones that helped us integrate the schools. They're the ones that protected us mm-hmm. from police abuse and from dog attacks. And They're the ones who fought for us to have equal housing rights. And so it's kind of hard on one hand to say, we don't want the federal government and states should make their own decisions when you're a group of people who, if it wasn't for the federal government, we'd probably still be slaves and we'd still be segregated. And so that reality has not really
Recognizing the problem is part of
Right.
solving it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then this becomes this tension that white Republicans just don't like black people. And I say there's racists on both sides of the aisle. It's not like the Republican Party has a majority hold
So
on
there's
that.
profiling from the other side as well as the
Sure.
historic profiling from
Sure,
the conservative
definitely.
side.
And so, that's out there. And when you now try to say, listen, Republicans, there are values and policies that are really beneficial for us, it's kind of hard to get over all the stigma of just, slogans and statements like
Yes.
we want our country back and we want this
Yes.
back. And so, as a person of color or even an immigrant, you could be like, really? Because when you had your country back, like I was enslaved,
Right.
I was not treated so well. So what kind of country is it that you want back? And we're not wanting to go back to
Right.
being,
Right.
attacked by dogs and water hoses.
Well, let's bring Gil into this now. Now, Gil, obviously from the Hispanic community, do you feel that you're, I guess, fighting the tide as much? Is it a different viewpoint from where you're standing? You understand what she's saying from a historic purpose, and from your position, you're in the media, you're able to get the message out, free speech as it were. So how do you see it?
Well, I believe that significant strides have been made in regards to the Latino community politically. You do hear these days of Republican Latinos. So there are a lot of change that has taken place over the past decade even. There's a lot more participation in the process. I think that there's much more diversity in the local and statewide scope in terms of Latinos being elected into office. If you look at the state representatives and Hartford's mayors, over the last few terms, having a Hispanic mayor, having Latino representation in city council and state government is important because you're able to address the issues that exist within our communities, whether it be education, policing, public safety, and what we've seen in terms of the development of Hartford specifically as an urban city has been, in my mind, a very positive change as a result of having that diversity within government.
Well, let me just continue on. Currently, what do you think is the biggest obstruction to progressing this ahead and the outreach to the urban community? What do you see as the biggest hurdle to overcome to progressing it further?
Well, I really think that we need to feed off of the cultural diversity, and
Who's at fault here? Is it the conservatives? Is it the Hispanic? I mean, is it fault lays on both sides? I mean, there needs to be a mediator in the middle.
Well, I'd rather not point fingers. I'd like to, rather discuss what some of the things are that can be done to fully engage, communities and getting communities to interact and accept each other. And I think that, a strong focus on arts and culture is huge,
Because that's a common area for people.
Exactly, music. There is, again, speaking of Greater Hartford specifically, there's so much wonderful talent. There's so much artistical talent. There's so much musical talent within the Greater Hartford area that if you really want to, let's say, revitalize downtown, for example, if the arts organizations and the arts foundations were to get on board and start supporting more of the efforts.
Have you reached out to those folks to get that support?
Over the past, yes, as my previous.
Is there good reception?
Well, I think it's a hard sell, and the recent downturn of the economy certainly didn't help in that regard. Sponsorships for live productions or live performances have sort of dried up, if you will. Organizations that were having large cultural events no longer had the corporate sponsorships that they used to
That
depend on to
discretionary
make these
funding
things
just
happen.
isn't there.
Right. So I think that if we, have funding in place for these arts groups and these arts organizations that really develop this wonderful programming that is going to fall into the whole development of, an urban city, that everyone wins. You can't have entertainment, you can't have a vibrant town unless you have entertainment, especially for the younger generations, which we're trying to.
And once people are
entertain.
actually provided with that and exposed to it, they learn to like it. And I hate to pick something as trite as this, but that music from La Bamba, people like that kind of thing. Once they get into it's like going down to New Orleans and getting into the culture down there, you enjoy it.
I think
But
it's
the exposure
important
isn't
to, yes, and I think it's important to really take a close look at the makeup of, let's say, Hartford specifically. What are the populations there? I think the West Indian community is the third largest in the United States.
Yes.
You have a significant Puerto Rican population compared to the total number of Hispanics. But there are growing Latino communities within that makeup, and that's very exciting. So there's a focus that needs to be more intense. You have to involve your community in terms of what are the things that you're going to be funding in terms of arts and culture. We talk about visual artists alone. There's so much talent in the Greater Hartford area. You have so many great signature events taking place. The Greater Hartford Festival of Jazz. You have some of the schools are finally making a larger focus or focusing on music and arts within the school. Look at the Greater Hartford Arts Academy and their 21-piece jazz choir just won an award. I think that the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts was just recently named the best art school or music or art school in the country. So there's a lot going on that we're all very excited by. I just think that a lot more focus can be put onto the arts that are more reflective of the Hartford's community in order to revitalize. And
Sure. Regina, what would you see as your top 2 strategies for reaching out? I mean, Gil is mentioning the fact that cultural activities. What do you see as 3 strategies that are going to make a better connection, a better communication, perhaps a better catalyst for bringing the conservatives together along with the urban community? What do you see?
I think it has to be relationships and
Meaning personal
relationships, but I think in personal relationships you're allowed to actually really look at what are the issues that are affecting you in daily life. And to Gil's point, culture is important in arts and entertainment, but there would be others who would say that education, housing situations, public safety are priorities as well. And so I think that when we look at trying to tackle these, I don't even think it matters what side of the aisle you're on. Oftentimes you make decisions about a group of people without including that group of people. And so
That's a good point. It's a good point.
You can't do that. And so when we just look at education, when we think about empowering parents, and I think that that is really key. It's something that our group is going to be working on with this legislative session coming up, and looking at some of the education bills and policies that block parents and lock parents out of the education process, intimidate them, and that you have people who make a living based on what happens with education, making the decisions for the kids. And that needs to change. And so when I say relationships, I really mean that it has to...
Is that how you build trust then? When you have a
Definitely.
personal relationship, so you build trust, and then when the other person suggests or recommends something, that person will tend to say, I'll try it.
Yes, but I know that not every legislator has the time to make those personal
Sure.
relationships. And so I think we kind of rely on community organizing, on institutions that are set up kind of to be a liaison. But what has happened, I think, historically, right, is what we've seen is that these larger institutes that have been established to represent the people have then been swayed by city money, political monies. You know, if he gets in office, then we get this grant, right? And so then you stop really being concerned about the people that you were put there to represent, you know, or why your
You're just
nonprofit
doing
was
a balancing
created.
act.
Right. And so now it's more about, well, we need to make the budget and not,
I
well,
see.
what
The
about
priorities take over, okay.
and so, in order to change that, I think when you think about, which you always hear about, personal responsibility and individual freedom, that has to be relayed in a way that, you know what, we need to empower parents, we need to support them in their efforts because they're being, you know, railroaded, bombarded, bullied, and having those kind of conversations. And so when you look at, you know, the urban communities across Connecticut, they are majority run by Democratic parties. And, you know, we could go into a long philosophical debate about why that is, but the fact is that it is. And so when you look at those communities that have had the Democrats leading them, and you are in the situation that you're in, then you can't sit here and say the Republicans are evil people because we've not had control over your policymaking. And so I think what CBRAC, Connecticut Black Republicans and Conservatives, is seeking to do is to kind of build a balance. There needs to be accountability. And I think if one party rule has been in place and you're not seeing the kind of results, then let's think about balance. And then I'm not saying that that party is wrong, because even one party rule for a Republican, I don't know that that's good either, right? I just think that one party dominating does not display the democratic kind of values that we think of ourselves as having in the US. And so we have to think about how we find that balance.
And putting down the other party is totally destructive to the whole
Yes,
thing.
it certainly is.
Demoralizing the other party or demoralizing the representatives from the other party. And we get really off track when you start to personalize that
Yes.
message with so-and-so. Well, do you know that he spent time in jail before? Are you sure you want to have him running this and so forth? I think, all right, well, Gil, kind of back to you. Do you feel that you follow the same things? I mean, we hear, or at least if I'm hearing correctly, that we need to do more things with parents. We need to do more things in the educational area and so forth. Are those the same areas of issues for the Hispanics? Do the Hispanics say we aren't given proper educational opportunities, or we need more funding for certain things? I mean, is there a common ground between the two communities?
Well, from an education standpoint, I believe that a lot of strides have been made. If you look at historically what's been, thanks to the leadership of folks like Maria Sanchez and people that fought very hard in the legislature for bilingual education, you know, strides have been made there. And many of the magnet schools that have developed in the Greater Hartford area and statewide have changed many things. There are many high schools now that are focused on, they're focused more on actual professions and interests that a student has based on their gifts, and I think that that's been working well. Sure, there's a lot more that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of improving public safety, but I think it's also important to note that, you know, the progress that has been made thus far. The reason why I talk about arts and culture and it's mainly from a point of inclusion. I think that when you include the neighborhoods in an urban city by showcasing their rich art and culture and their heritage and allowing them venues and opportunities to celebrate that, I think that it gives you a sense of pride.
Yes.
I think that many things that are happening in Hartford specifically, the capital city, from a pride perspective, you know, if you just think about the stadium that's coming, you know, it sounds simple to a lot of people, but if you have a city team to rally around, and, you know, and
Teamwork is always invaluable. I mean, people being on the same page and saying and understanding that this particular thing. I mean, you may not even be interested in the sports thing, but you need to recognize the value of what this will do.
Right, and you know, we're talking about economic development here. We're talking when we talk about, you know, arts and culture and what it plays in terms of revitalizing an inner city. with all the energy that's going on and the focus that's going on in urban areas in Connecticut, especially Hartford, you know, you can't have one without the other.
Yes.
Especially if you're attracting young people, you have to have entertainment. You have to have. When I say entertainment, I'm basically speaking about taking advantage of all the rich talent that you have. You know, talking live music, live entertainment, which can really make Hartford specifically a very unique place to come to and to be and to experience different cultures through music, through food, and through art.
I think you're right. Again, you get back to things that make that people can touch on. If you talk about the arts, if you talk about food, this is all a common thing to everybody, to every culture. These are very important things. Well, another question I want to ask, which may or may not really be relative, but I think it is. We have large urban areas, large cities. We have Hartford and Bridgeport, that are mostly, the majority, are made up of what we refer to as minorities. Now, is minority really an accurate word for these respective cultures or communities? Is minority a good word? I mean, and how are we using it? I mean, is that an old-fashioned word, or do we still feel that it represents what we're really talking about?
Well, certainly doesn't apply in those areas.
No.
I mean, you understand where I'm
those
coming
cities.
from?
Yeah, I think because you look at it in the reference of the world,
Yes.
you know, or the United States.
Yes.
But then if maybe it's just the United States, 'cause I don't
Yes.
even know if they use those terms like in Europe,
Yes.
you know, or Africa or Brazil,
Yes.
you know, or to South America, because then, you know, being of Latino, Hispanic, you're not the minority, right? Because that's
Right.
what mostly that country is.
Right.
So I think it's the U.S. So if we just stay within the realms of the U.S. and we talk about minority, we also understand that the U.S. is getting browner, right? So, you know, black and brown bodies will not be a minority very much longer. And
I think that's where I'm going with my
Right.
question, yeah.
and so I think as time progresses, we will change the terminology because there was a time when calling me a Negro was fine, right? That was acceptable. That's what they used, or calling me colored. You do that now to some people, and you know it's, you know, we're about to go outside and you know have a little fist fight.
Right, right.
So I think as culture progresses, as we move along, just in our makeup of who we are, and as time moves on, we'll move away from the word minority. Because I think even if you look at the census, like that's one of the biggest
Yes.
things people have been talking about. You need to have better options.
Yes.
And it's only recently now that it was Hispanic and non-Hispanic.
Right.
You had white Hispanic and white non-Hispanic and
Yes.
black non-Hispanic. You know, so I think maybe if we look at the census in 10 or 20 years, we might have different opportunities for people to really clearly identify who they are. But I think we are becoming more of a melting pot than we ever, thought of, because as we have immigration, as people travel, as we just explore this world, I think we're just going to see different ethnicities and people being proud. I think I appreciate that more now than ever, of people actually really being proud of wanting to claim their ethnicity and their heritage, and even if it's mixed, and I'm working with a group of people who are Native American, and they refer to themselves as indigenous people.
Yes.
Right?
Which is a very accurate term for them.
But then there's many of us that could say we have indigenous blood in our bloodlines.
It could be the I word.
Right,
Yeah,
and so
right.
when you think about Native Americans and Irish, right, when
Yes,
they came
yes,
over,
yes.
and so I think we're just coming to a place where people are beginning to own their ethnicity, and I believe the word minority will disappear at some point.
Well, between the two communities, obviously you being in the media, your plan to help the conservative side to this outreach, do you have, I see it personally with a marketing background. I see this whole thing needing a marketing plan.
Yes.
With strategies, with tactics. This would be very typical of what they would do in a corporation. They'd set up the objective, they'd state what the mission was, they would put a marketing plan together, et cetera, and go down. Is that where you're going, and could Gil be part of that? Because he's got a place to, I see you two working together.
And Gil and I were talking about that off camera.
Okay, well, there you go.
about doing that together. And I think marketing is very much a key, but I almost want to be careful about the phrase called the bait and switch, in the idea that we can't market what's not there, right? And so to market that, you know, this is a group of people, or the Connecticut Republican Party is, you know, embracing of different ethnicities and cultures, and that they're comfortable with that. Many are, many aren't, right? And so I think I think what's happening with our party, which I appreciate in Connecticut, is that there's been this real internal self-reflection of, right, you know what? I have to do a little bit better with how I relate to other ethnicities, how I think about other
So instead of changing the other people, we need to change. Is it
Yeah,
that position?
Yeah,
Okay.
and changing doesn't mean moving away from your values. Changing simply means that you have to look at the way you address people. And I mean, honestly, like, if you dropped me in Ireland, I would probably offend somebody, right? Not because I'm trying to, but I don't know the culture. I don't know how to appreciate it. I might point things out which they might consider rude,
Yes.
right? So if I go to certain people's homes, right? You got to take your shoes off. Like, you just don't, you know. And so I feel like that it's possible that when you look at the Black community, you look at the Latino community, and you may not appreciate the fact that that's a culture.
Yes.
Right, and so there are pros and cons. There are things that you need to respect there. There are histories, traditions, values, right? And when you and that's not a right word, but when you whitewash it,
Yes,
right,
yes.
and make it like, oh, everybody's American.
Right.
Why can't we all just be American?
Yeah.
Well, that's not true, because Italians are different from Greeks, are different from Jews and Catholics. And so why can't you appreciate culture too? And so it's a pushback. But I think it's going to take time, and I think that they're open to that, but no one has ever pushed them back on that and said, listen, I could tell you about it if you'd like to know. And so I think that's what our organization is doing internally for the Republican Party in Connecticut. And there are many groups like us in other states doing similar things. And so we network and we talk about, you know, how's it going and what are the strategies that we're using.
So presentation is important. The person giving the message is important. Obviously, the message is important. And then I think you need to that's where we get back to the marketing plan, is then you have a benchmark, would you not say, Gil, that you get from which you can say, okay, we need to do that. And I have a lightning question I want to ask
Absolutely,
you folks.
and you know, you really need to, we really need to do a better job of educating our community about public access television and the fact that it's all about freedom of speech.
Yes.
It's all about access. We want to make sure that the community is aware that they can go into their public access stations, they can receive the training, the resources are there to allow them to produce programming that's going to give them that voice, allow them to present their views.
All right, well, so speaking of education, my quick question for the two of you, Regina, I'll ask you first. What do you think of President Obama's proposal for community college 2 years free? Yes, no, good idea, not a good?
I'm going to say no,
Okay,
because I think that it hasn't been well thought out.
okay,
And if you're going to do 2 years of college, then that should be something that child can take to any college, not just a community.
okay. Gil?
I think it's a wonderful idea. I agree that a lot of things, a lot of aspects need to be, you know, really thought out, and there's a lot of entities that need to be included in that process, in that consideration. But I do know that there's a lot of young people that are going in that direction there because of the exuberant costs in education these days. They will start off at a community college and get their associates and then move to the college of their choice. My son,
Yes.
as an example, my youngest son is actually doing that.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for being very candid, I think, and very helpful and at least taking us down the right road. And I'd like to give your websites. I think you have a new one, Gil, that you've got www.hpatv.org. Do I have that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Regina, it is www.ctbrac.org.
That's
Is
right.
that correct? And once again, I would like to thank the Connecticut Historical Society for their ongoing hospitality. They have a current exhibit. It's called Rebuilding Hartford. I think probably relates to what we've been talking about today. And it's a city captured by artist Richard Welling. You can see us on Facebook, and you can see all of our programs on our website at www.ctvalleyviews.com. This is Susan Regan. Thank you for joining me in bringing proof to the people. Glenn Cassis, Executive Director of the African-American Affairs Commission for the State of Connecticut, also was to participate on the panel, but he was unable to attend due to unforeseen circumstances. He looks forward to a future opportunity to do so. Our thanks to Windsor Federal Savings for making this program possible. Neighbors helping neighbors since 1936.